Ceased. October 937. It wasn't Elfkin. Their warrior who had been butchered may once have looked like the younger version of the boy Osrith had raised to battle all those decades ago. But here, now, this man was not Elfkin, commander of King Ethelstan's mercenary guard. As the injured men were brought into the courtyard, Osrith followed, to a room near the armory, where priests cried out to one another that they were needed, and more hurried. Not that they could do very much, Osrith was convinced, and she watched as the first man who looked so like Elfkin, was put on his side, his shaking form causing blood to well and seep across the woolen blanket on which he had been placed. More were arriving, and a shudder came across Osrith. This was no war, no aim to garner treaty, it was intended by the coalition of Cymric and Gaelish leaders and kings that this was to be genocide, the eradication of a nation, of the Anglish and Saxon nation that was being called England, an elimination of anyone with the blood of Hengist and Horsa, of the Jutes and the Geats and the Frisians. To free up land for the Norse who would have done this, more land in Dulriata, she supposed, and Northumbria, the prize. It's like St. Jerome's cannibals all over again, Osrith heard one priest say, as she lingered by the door, unable to look at the butchery, unable to move away. What? Said the other, clearly confused. St. Jerome, began the first priest, seemingly oblivious to his horrendous task in front of him. There could be no chance the once warrior would recover. He wrote back to his brother in Rome of the Picts and Scoti, Atticoti and Gaels, who were ranging wild and causing great devastations. I have never heard of the Atticoti, scoffed the second, as the first plunged his hands into water where steam rose from the surface, before seizing the poor man's left lung and maneuvering it back into the chest cavity. Oh, they come from far beyond the northern Roman wall, to the east, south of the lands of the Picts, the first priest said, moving the heart so the second could be repositioned. It was for death, Osrith realized now, even though she could see that the man was clearly alive, and shuddered every time the priest touched his internal organs. And they are cannibals? The second priest asked, looking at the warrior, doubtfully. Did they want these men's organs for tkais? They were, in St. Jerome's day. The first laughed, lightly, as if listening to an amusing anecdote and not positioning the circulatory system back into the Anglish warrior. It didn't last long, though. After looking back to the near corpse, it was before we came to these shores, he told the man wistfully, and it was the first time Osrith thought that she has heard a Saxon actually verbalize their origins. All knew it, Bede had written of it of course, but all now knew that this war was not about land or gold or assets, this was to wipe a people out of a country, at least, drive them back into the Eastern Sea, as she had heard King Hywil say all too clearly. And, all too clearly a very own, even Sindlan, the most likely of them all to turn on them all for his own gain, of Aberfra and the crown of Gwynedd, had agreed to this aim. The Atticoti, mused the first man. But while Osrith was interested in the name of a people, a Britons, she reasoned, that she had never heard of before, the more pressing matter in her head was the dozen or so warriors, soldiers, who were being brought in, as unfortunate as the first man, brutalized and battered. Osrith went to the chapel again, as yet more injured were brought in, and she thought about this place. The metallic smell of blood mingled with the stench of incense made her feel sick. She was in Mercia, at least. Mercia was in her heart. She had fought so long, so many years in the country, and may yet still have been there far longer than the deferred word Gild for the death of Eadgulf, exchanged for years of service, if it had not been for Constantine pulling on her soul to return to Alberdash. It was not just Constantine. Had she not been tied by blood to Utah, she would never have been in Mercia in the first place, for she would never have been in Wessex. She would never have lost her heart to Finan. Could she fathom that? Knew that she wanted her brother all that time? Even if there was no hope, Osrith knew she needed to be near Utad. She did not know how long she sat there until she was aware of a figure appear in her line of sight. People had come and gone and the sun was growing weaker through the thinly shuttered windows. What made Osrith look up at that moment? She watched the figure as she knelt at the altar. Black-haired, The woman was slight, diminutive, but what drew Osrith's attention was the woman's neck. A huge scar ran from her left ear and ran at an angle down her neck. Osrith shifted in her seat, and then heard words, Latin words. The woman was praying in Latin, which was not unusual, but together, Osrith knew who it was, and therefore, who else might be. Now, at Easter, it was Benedetta, Utad's lover, the slave who he had rescued from London at the time of Æthelstan's battle to gain the kingship of England. As if aware she was being watched, the woman turned and, yes, Osrith could see that it was indeed Benedetta, and, as Osrith wondered what Benedetta thought, the Italian woman looked at her. "Lady," she said softly, through the prayers and words being uttered around them, "I knew you would come to him." Osrith got to her feet. She hadn't though, not for Utad, but away from Constantine. Even thinking those thoughts, Osrith knew them to be true, and she nodded to Benedetta. "I am not a lady, not any longer. And this is not my place," she told Benedetta, and got to her feet. The darkness was such that she knocked into several people wandering into the chapel, a few shooting back some words of exclamation, but Osrith ignored them all as she stumbled, heavy-limbed, to the arch of light that was the door to the courtyard at the Bear of Easter. Behind her, footsteps came, and when Osrith's way was blocked, 3 abreast coming down the narrow aisle, she stopped, pressing her back against the stonework, letting the man lead a woman clutching a child to her shamble past her. He took up the sword, Benedetta told her urgently, gripping tightly with her slight hand and causing Osrith to turn, before she had a chance to move on. "Utad, he saw you had laid the sword there." "And he is here?" Osrith asked, voicing words she knew to be true. Of course he would be here. He was given a message that Bibbenberg was going to be taken, a lord in the service of Æthelstan had come. He hid, and humiliated him, reinforced the guard at Bibbenberg. "Young Utad," Osrith sighed. "Tell me he is at Bibbenberg." "Not here." "He is at Bibbenberg," Benedetta told her. "Or, at least he was." "Come," she added, and led Osrith back to the altar. "We pray." "No, no," said Osrith, "but let the woman lead her to where the altar, surrounded by a good supply of priests, loomed before them. "I am without God, without what I know. I have broken God's word, the Church's word. Santa Pedra will recognize you when you get to the gates," Benedetta reassured her. "What have you done?" "Left," Osrith told her. "Left Constantine, and a man who I swore to be wife to, under the law. Sant'Gianni brought Christ to the British Islands," she added. "Sant'Gianni's church is the first church here, and whose laws I have broken, St. Comsill's church." "Then, come," Benedetta told her, her dark eyes glowing in the candlelight, and Osrith knew, now, why her brother had not cared whether Eadith was alive or not, after he had travelled up from London after Æthelstan's coronation. It was still wrong, in her heart, for Eadith had been ever faithful to her brother. But there was an enchantment there, a spirit that was irresistible. "Utad will like to see you." "Utad will not," Osrith told her, getting to her feet. But Benedetta had begun to pray. What compelled Osrith to kneel back down beside the woman, she did not know. She knew the woman's words, too, for they were the Lord's Prayer, which she was saying in Latin, and Osrith closed her eyes, kneeling as Biko had taught her to kneel, showing her how to pray, bending her head, and she felt the weight of his presence. She did not know how long she knelt there, but when Osrith opened her eyes, Benedetta was still beside her. "Do you know what to do now?" Benedetta asked, when Osrith dropped her hands, for it was only then that she realized that she had been praying too. "No, but I know that I will know when the time is right." And, as Benedetta got to her feet, it was Osrith's turn to grab the woman's arm. "Is he here with Utad?" she found herself asking. "Finan?" "He is here," she told her, and made to walk away. Why she did not became clear when the voice of a priest approached them. It was Bishop Oswald. "I can escort you back to my father," he told Benedetta, who gave Osrith a quick glance, and anger flared in her stomach. How could her brother never have told him that he was proud of him, that he had done well for himself, following God's path? After his castration by Brida and Ragnall, However, had he not brought him to him and told him he was his own son, no matter what, young Finan was her son, and would always be her son, despite turning to Constantine, his mother, herself, an outlaw now. And you, he said to Osrith, whoever you are, you must go, if you are not sick or in need of food. As you can see, we have more than enough people in need at the present time. Why? Osrith asked, a belligerent streak in her question. Are not sinners not in need of a bishop's prayers than the king of all Britain? There was a pause, and then Bishop Oswald's eyes widened. Aunt, what are you doing here? She flees from the north, Benedetta told Osrith, and she knew that she could not be angry with the woman, not least because it was true. She is an outlaw from the King of the Scots. Then, you will remain here under my protection, her nephew told Osrith, his face displaying the compassion that she recognized, and he raised a hand to a priest and explained that Benedetta needed to be taken to the Lord Utard. Protection, or watch? Osrith asked, as she watched the wake of the woman who would, had it not been down to her belief that marriage was a curse, be her sister-in-law. Aunt Osrith? Bishop Oswald turned to look at her, surprised. For I am a Gael, you know this, I cannot expect this to be overlooked. But she proceeded to allow her nephew to escort her to his rooms at the far end of the chapel. You wish me to marry Finan and you? He asked after Osrith allowed him to give her food and water. Mean fare for the destruction to the farms had an effect on the quantity and availability of food that was making its way into the city, and told him about fleeing Constantine, the arrangement with Domnall, the particularities with Brehanlaw. Osrith paused. It was a shock to hear him ask, more because she had not thought about it herself. Did she want to be with him, married again? She had no land anymore. It was Domnall's now. Yes. No. More that, Osrith said, after her nephew had spoken to a priest about Osrith being able to bathe and new clothes, waving away her protestations. As far as Constantine is concerned, an Alba citizen, one of nobility, in the law, and with Constantine, for they are one and the same. And so, this will no doubt have got to Athelistan, she added. And should I be discovered here, it will be inferred I am a spy. Aunt, they intend to try to eliminate every single Saxon and drive them back to the sea. Her words came out as a choking shriek, the realization at the words getting to her soul. That's preposterous. No, Oswald, it isn't. There are plans for every single Burhan city she hesitated, in England. Even London, they could never, they might, they have Norse with them, Irian Norse Anleth, who is to have Ofoiki will to have Lundin, and Irian warriors too? Osrith paused. Not that I know of, Domnall of the Uineal, of course. She got to her feet. I wish you to find your father and tell me where he is, that I may speak to him. She watched Bishop Oswald flinch. Come, rest, he told her. But Osrith could tell from his expression that her words had him worried. A little frown had come to his face in the same way that she remembered Gisla's would, the little ounce of worry appearing on her perfect face when Utard was fighting away, when she was in Winchester alone, when she was relying on the Britons for the things she needed. He held the door and led her to another chamber, where hot water and ferns had been brought. Britons were within the sphere of Caesar, then. I am sure Utard would speak to you, Bishop Oswald told her, when she had dressed in the clean, new breeches and shirt that he had arranged for her. She belted Buey and tagged Sikhs and returned to him, continuing their discussion. Although she felt grateful for his kindness, Osrith still felt a good deal of caution. I do not feel that there is too much to be made of what you have said, Osrith's nephew told her. Oh, not to say it was not said. And oaths were not given. But Athelistan has not even had word that much is happening. Yes, we have had skirmishes, but no Gaels, yourself excepted, has been anywhere south of Caerliguilid, or Dunham, and, believe me, we have many rangers gathering the information. Norse, yes, he added, anticipating Osrith's protestation. At least, Constantine is not with them. What? Osrith was astounded. What had she told him for? She had been there, there was no doubt that Constantine was holding anything back. Everything he had, every alliance he had negotiated, was going south. All I have seen of his northern alliance are Norse, and then they are settled in the land Ethelflod gave them. Bishop Oswald continued. The Norse who are attacking the land are doing so at their base from Thingwall. It is already a Norse settlement on Dee. There is marshland there. If Anlaf comes, he will bring the Norse navy from Dublin and land there, pretend to be part of the settlement. And Osrith knew he would not help. She knew that her nephew did not believe what she was trying to tell him. She got to her feet. If she wanted to speak to Uhtred, tell him all she knew, at least get the information to Aethelstan, she would have to do it alone. I have a letter from my brother. It is intended for our father, Bishop Oswald continued, watching her make her way to the door, but not stopping her. He sent it with one of Uhtred's men, Egil, who writes that Constantine has been seen coming down east coast and up Humber, across land, the same way Osrith had come when she was first went to Seaster. Angus, Felim, Owain all knew the way, and he could pick up as many Danes and Norse allied to Anlaf along the way. I hope your brother is well still defending Bibbenberg, at least. He is holding Bibbenberg, or had been, when Egil returned with the news. Bishop Oswald told her. Constantine has largely left Bibbenberg's lands alone. What you have told me is the truth, aunt, he added. But if Osrith felt she had been used, had been tested by the Bishop of Seaster's interrogation of her, it went past her, for her chest bursting with sorrow. Up to then, with her nephew's firm, reassuring words, Osrith had hope that Constantine had indeed thought better of invading with an alliance of nations. But then, the country was already a place of war. Ethelflod had already opposed the Norse here 30 years before. Saxons had already fought and gained victory over the Britons there in the year 613, no doubt the Romans, too, in their time when the city had been called Diva. Where are you going? Bishop Oswald asked, although he did nothing to stop her. To find him. I need to see Uhtred. He is here. I chose correctly when I came to the place every other wretch in this country is coming to. Osrith was aware her voice was bald, abrupt. This was no place or time for manners. He is not pleased with me, aunt, Bishop Oswald admitted. When is he ever? I embarrassed him by giving him forewarning of an attack on Bibbenberg. Attack? A peaceful takeover in the name of Aethelstan, in order to force the king to show his hand. Then he is blaming himself if he is blaming you, Osrith told her nephew, and me, of course, for your mother's death. I can never forget what he did. You can forgive, Bishop Oswald suggested. I never hated him for it, Osrith told Bishop Oswald, for I know I killed her, maybe hastened it, if she was dying anyway, maybe afforded her some peace. I nearly died of the same thing. Childbed fever. It was acute bleeding, Bishop Oswald told her, and Osrith could tell that he had closed up, holding his pain away from his heart as he spoke to her, woodenly. It was an infection, Osrith explained, though still her words were blunt, and I could not stop it, and I was a coward. Uhtred, she added, her voice anguished as she called her nephew by her birth name. No, don't look from me. That is the name your father wanted you to have. He loves you, no matter his actions. And I have always loved him. She was now pacing over to him, and put her hand to his face, moving his head back to hers. He made to slap her hand away, but lowered it when he saw her face. Now I need his approval, to fight beside him in this war, against the people who adopted me as their own. I will stand and fight them all, even my own son, who is more Gael than ever he was a Briton or a Saxon, she added. Because I need him, I need my brother, nephew, Osrith added, and if I am honest, I believe I always have done. You are not to fight, I forbid it, Oswald said, suddenly. You cannot forbid it, she told him fiercely, turning on him with an anger she had not felt for a long time. I was 12 when I first stepped onto a battlefield. I never chose that life. But no one is going to forbid or permit me to go to war. Her words were shouted, and she strode to the door, turning when she got there, and thanking him for his hospitality. Oswald followed her and took her wrist of the hand that was already on the latch. All at once, The fight left her. Aunt ... Let me do something for you. Let me keep you safe. And Osrith did something that she had never done before. Grabbing Bishop Oswald by the shoulders, she pulled herself to him, decades of repressed anguish leaking from her eyes, mouth, nose. Tears was too mild a word for the torrent, the maelstrom of chaos that was her distress. The man who had once been her brother's eldest son took Osrith by her forearms and let her unload her anger and her fear onto his robes, fending back priests who were approaching him with a glare. It came in waves, her sorrow, her self-pity, her regret, everything she had bottled up inside herself, thought long drowned in her stomach. No. It had merely built there until there was nothing but disconsolation and blackness. She had been a coward. Constantine's alliance had come down to half of the country, Scots were attacking on the east, Nero Foic to defend the city, Norse with them as were Norse in the Irian Sea, all coming inland and destroying and despoiling. She had been a coward for listening to Domhnall. If the alliance knew that the lands were not properly gifted, many of the alliance, Guthfrith's Norse, the Strathclydians, Sindlan's Gwynedians, may well pull out, and there would be loss, so much loss of the blood of Gaels, Cymric, Britons, Norse. And Bishop Oswald could not give her any words of comfort, even if he tried, for there were none to be had on that night, the night before Brunanburh, and the world was as terrible and painful as it seemed, broken, aflame.